155,000 American soldiers, both Marines and Army, with the support of 1,300 warships, landed and poured fire on Okinawa Island, the last wall of the Japanese Empire, causing 110,000 soldiers to die in just 82 days of fierce fighting. Right now, please focus on the screen to witness one of the bloodiest battles that shook the Pacific scene in 1945. Codenamed Operation Iceberg, the final stage of World War II saw the bloodiest island landing of the U.S. and Allied forces on the Pacific Front. In the spring of 1945, the Allies approached Japan and aircraft were able to bomb Japanese cities. About 563 kilometers from Japan, Okinawa Island was considered the last wall before the Allied attack on the Japanese mainland. 120,000 Japanese troops led by General Mitsuru Ushijima were determined to defend the island. While the Allies estimated that Japan had only half of this number on the island, the Japanese forces were supported by 10,000 aircraft and the most powerful armored vehicles of the time, Yamato. Facing the Japanese were 155,000 American troops, including Marines and Army. Although later, the U.S. had to land more troops to be able to completely occupy the island of Okinawa. Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner commanded the Army to occupy the island with the support of 1,300 warships, including a British aircraft carrier group. From October 1944 to March 1945, the U.S. military launched airstrikes on Okinawa, eliminating hundreds of enemy aircraft. The naval bombardment began on 18th of March, while the Japanese responded with kamizake suicide attacks, damaging 4 U.S. aircraft carriers and destroying 2 others. Ground forces also gradually took over the neighboring islands. The U.S. 77th Infantry Division landed on Kerama Island on the 26th of March, facing weaker Japanese resistance. By the first landing on the 1st of April 1945, U.S. forces had fired a total of 44,825 artillery shells, 22,500 mortar rounds, and 32,000 rockets. The long minefield in front of Okinawa had also been cleared. At 4 a.m., the 24th Marine Corps, supported by naval and air support, began landing troops on Hagushi Beach in northern Okinawa. 4 hours and 30 minutes later, the American soldiers entered the mainland and were ready to fight to the last breath to open the battlefield. No one knew that the Japanese, with their new tactics, had deliberately allowed the American soldiers to easily set foot on the island. Until before dark, the American Army controlled a 12.8 kilometers wide coastal area with 60,000 people. The seemingly simple landing continued the next day. The American soldiers advanced deep into the island, dividing the Japanese forces in 2, occupying 2 airfields where suicide planes attacked American warships. The 6th Marine Division fell into a Japanese fascist ambush in the north. 3 weeks of fighting caused the American forces to suffer 1,200 casualties. The Japanese side suffered 2,500. General Buckner only truly knew the fierce confrontation when he attacked the south, where General Ushijima was entrenched. On April 4th, the 24th Marine Corps encountered fierce resistance at Shuri City. Ushijima knew that victory was impossible, but the Japanese general wanted to inflict as much damage as possible on the Americans through attrition warfare. The kamikaze attacks resumed on April 6th. 700 American 5th Fleet attack aircraft destroyed or damaged 13 destroyers. Attack aircraft destroyed or damaged 13 destroyers. A week later, the Japanese came up with a new suicide weapon. The aircraft-type missile was controlled by Japanese kamikaze pilots. Once activated at close range, the missile flew straight at the target at a speed of nearly 1,000 kilometers per hour. 34 Allied warships were destroyed by this weapon. Offshore, the Japanese fleet also launched a suicide mission. With little fuel left, the battleship Yamato, the cruiser Yahagi, and 8 other destroyers headed for Okinawa. But before they could support the forces on the island, the Japanese ships were intercepted by American aircraft. Without air cover, the Pride of Yamamoto and all the other ships were sunk. On the island, the Americans were stuck in front of Ushijima's defense system. Even if one American soldier fought 10 Japanese soldiers, the Allies could not advance a single step. On April 12th, the Japanese even counterattacked, although these attacks were quickly repulsed by the U.S. forces within 2 days. General Buckner ordered increased offshore support and resumed the attack. But the U.S. Marines could not overcome the Japanese defenses. On May 2nd, the Japanese attacked again and lost 5,000 men. The battle only showed signs of change on May 11th when General Buckner ordered a concentrated attack on the Japanese flank. To avoid being isolated, the Japanese fascists withdrew south and only kept a group to defend the city of Shuri until May 31st. The U.S. soldiers had to remember explosives and flamethrowers to gradually overcome the Japanese defenses. U.S. Marines landed on the southwest of the Oroku Peninsula to expand the airfield to support the Allies' advance south. General Buckner was even killed on June 18th by Japanese artillery while inspecting the situation on the battlefield. The Battle of Okinawa was a tragedy for the Japanese Empire when 110,000 soldiers were killed. The U.S. lost 12,000 soldiers, including 5,000 dead at sea and 37,000 wounded. For Japan, the Battle of Okinawa was the first time in World War II that they had to confront the enemy on their own territory. Most Japanese, including soldiers and Japanese people, believed that they would surely die if they fell into the hands of the Allies, so they chose to commit suicide instead of suffering the humiliation of defeat. Therefore, in addition to the pilots who died, many Japanese soldiers chose to commit suicide by taking the seppuku holiday by stabbing themselves in the stomach, determined not to surrender. Even General Ushijima and his chief of staff, Izamucho, committed suicide on June 22, 1945, the last day of the battle they could not win. The Japanese soldiers, under Ushijima's orders, continued to launch guerrilla attacks on the Americans until the end of June. The last 7,400 Japanese troops surrendered, ending 82 days of fierce fighting. However, according to Jinichi Yoshimune, who was about to enter elementary school when the battle broke out, the world was shocked. He said that the Okinawans were brainwashed by the Japanese government's propaganda machine. We were told that Japan was a holy country that could not lose the war. We believed that the Americans were bad and cruel. We were told that if the Americans caught us, they would cut off our ears, cut off our noses, gouge out our eyes, and crush us with tanks. Thousands of people fled the American attack by running up the cliffs. Hundreds of people were then shot by American soldiers and died. We had nowhere else to run. We were like rats caught in a trap. Soon there were so many dead that we had to step over their bodies. After the capture of Okinawa, American General Douglas MacArthur planned to invade the Japanese mainland in November of that year. However, growing concerns about the damage to the Allied forces led to another option. On the 26th of July 1945, the Allies in the Potsdam Declaration demanded that Japan surrender or face total destruction. However, Kantaro Suzuki, then Prime Minister of Japan, said that his government would not pay any attention to this ultimatum. His comments were considered disrespectful and uncalled for by U.S. President Harry S. Truman. Less than 2 months after the fall of Okinawa, at 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, Japan was engulfed in flames when the U.S. Air Force B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb named Little Boy on the city of Hiroshima, killing at least 90,000 people instantly. Many bodies were blown to pieces in the blast that destroyed 90% of the city's buildings. Captain Robert Lewis later wrote in his memoirs of the flight that those on board the Enola Gay were filthy men. Despite the devastating attack, most members of the Japanese War Council refused to abide by the terms of unconditional surrender. Japan's desperate situation was made worse when the Soviet Union invaded Manchuria, China, and overwhelmed the Japanese troops stationed there. On August 9th, the U.S. dropped the second atomic bomb, Fat Man, on the city of Nagasaki, instantly killing 70,000 people. On September 2, 1945, Japan signed the document of unconditional surrender on the U.S. battleship USS Missouri. The bloodiest war in human history officially ended. In terms of scale, historians say the Battle of Okinawa is second only to the Normandy landings. This was also the battle that caused the most casualties in the Pacific theater.